Welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course. My name's Ethan, and today we're learning how to play the Blighted Reach Expansion for ARCS. This video assumes that you've already seen my video or a similar video about the base game of ARCS. If you have not, please check out the card in the top right corner and go watch that video first. If you're interested in jumping right into the Blighted Reach expansion, you absolutely can watch this video for the hype, but you may be a little lost. I'm essentially layering more frosting onto the cake that is the base game of ARCS, so this video may seem to jump around a bit if you're not used to the base game. I have two quick disclaimers. One is that Leader Games provided me with the base game of ARCS as well as the Leaders and Lore pack. I'm super gracious to them, and I had a ton of fun playing the game. Now, I try not to get my opinions into these videos very much because they're meant to be purely instructional, but I did really enjoy the game, and I do think the Blighted Reach is worth picking up if you have 4 to 6 hours to spend with 2 to 3 other friends. My second disclaimer is that I'm not meaning to step on the toes of Shut Up and Sit Down or RTFM. If you want different ways of explaining this game, please go check them out. I love them, I get a ton of inspiration from them, and both of the channels make very wildly different but very informative content. I learn in a way that's simply instructional and a little bit monotone, so I try to teach in the same way that I learn. I also am going to put timestamps for skipping setup and for each individual thing in the description below, so if you need to reference something, please come back to this video and rewatch the segment. I'm even going to go in the order of the rulebook, so if you have that handy, please grab that and check it out with me. That was a pretty lengthy intro, but honestly, if you're looking at this expansion, you don't care about just doing the bare minimum. So please take a look at the Blighted Reach expansion with me. Just like in the base game, we'll set the game board up in reach of all players. Then we'll collect the 25 resources. Just like in the base game, I'll just leave these here for the video, but normally you just leave them off to the side. Especially because this might actually matter this game, believe it or not. We'll of course collect the 18 battle dice as well, but we'll also need these double-sided tokens called Blight nearby, as well as the 14 free starports, the ones that are in gray, and the 28 free cities. We'll give the initiative marker to a random player. Red got beat up in my base game video, so why not give him a chance? Then we'll shuffle all the action cards, just like we did with the base game, including the 1s and 7s because we're setting up for a 4-player game. On top of that, we're also going to shuffle 3 event cards into the deck because of the campaign. Place the 3 ambition markers in their designated spots. And then we'll place the chapter marker tract, labeled Act 1 and 2 for the campaign, on top, replacing the old chapter marker track. And then place the chapter marker on Chapter 1. We'll also, of course, need the Ambition Declared marker handy nearby. Then we'll take the new set of Campaign Court, Guild, and Vox cards and shuffle them together to create the Court row. On top of this, we'll also shuffle in 1 lore card per player. These are from the base game. Then for a 4-player game, deal out 4 of these cards to build the court. We'll then place the Imperial Council with the in-session side face up as the leftmost spot in the court. Then take the 3 Govern the Imperial Reach Edict cards and shuffle them. Then we'll place them randomly face up in the first slots on this rules accordion booklet. Then we'll roll the number die. We'll place an Imperial ship in each system in this numbered cluster and its nextmost clockwise cluster. So this 4-gate and 5-gate are both going to get one, and each of the systems in those clusters, making 8 ships in total. Then we'll roll the event die. We'll place 1 free city in each planet of the rolled planet symbol outside of the current Imperial clusters. So we got this moon symbol, which means in every moon system we'll place a free city, except for the ones that are inside the current Imperial cluster. Then we'll place 1 Blight with its damage side face up in each system, including gates that are not part of the Imperial clusters. So before setting up our players, the system should look something like this, with plenty of Blight, plenty of Empire, and a few free cities. Now it's time to set up the players. You'll place your starports, ships, and agents nearby as always, and then place all of your cities on the city slots on your player board. This is where setup differs. We cannot use the leaders found in the base game. These won't be used ever in the campaign. Instead, we'll use the fates. They're marked A, B, and C on the back. For the first active setup, we'll choose from the A fates. Each person's going to pick 2 at random and then choose what to set up for themselves. I'm going to choose Steward as my fate for Act 1. Every fate has the explanation of how it's attempting to win the game. and this will be a very different experience for each player. It also has a number in the top right-hand corner. This is what's going to tell us what deck to grab out of the box. In the box, all 24 possible fates are organized. We're going to choose the number 1 because Steward has the number 1 and take all of the components, including any deck of cards and any tokens that may come with it. Instead of setting up with a random setup card like in the base game, we have a specific setup to our fate. So we're going to follow the Act 1 setup for whichever fate we chose. The Steward says to first gain the Imperial Authority and the Dealmaker's card. So we'll place both of those by our player board. It also says to gain the first Regent tile. This shows loyalty to the Empire and would have been given to the first player in turn order if we didn't grab it. On the back of the setup card is the Objective card. Each player will place their objective marker on the power track space shown by the large clock on the objective card that's equal to the number of players in the game. So with 4 players, we'll put our objective marker at 14. Although we're placing our objective marker at 14, we'll always still place our power marker at 0, along with all other players. Each player will then take the title card, they're all the same, and place it with the Imperial Regent side face up, partially under your Fate card, to show your current status to the Empire. Each player then places 3 ships and 1 building of their choice between city or starport into any system on the map with Imperial ships in it. Each player will do this in turn order, ending with the last player, and then the last player will go again and do it once more in reverse turn order. Each player will then gain the resources of the planet types that they chose. Then place a free city in all empty building slots on planets with Imperial ships. In this case, there's only 1 on the map. We'll then deal 6 action cards randomly to each player for their first hand in the first round. And we'll discard all action cards not in player's hand into the action discard pile on the map, face down. Whew, that's quite a bit more setup than the base game. Well, the game is played largely similar to the way that the base game is played. The first player with the initiative marker will play their lead card, and everybody can either surpass, pivot, or copy that lead card in order to do their actions. Think of this as just layered on top of it. All of the mechanics hold out the same. The only major difference to the chapters is that there are 3 acts. Each of these 3 acts will consist of multiple chapters. So you'll basically play an entire game of ARCS 3 times. There also is no immediate winning. Well, at least in most cases. But think of the power track as not a goal anymore. It's simply how much can you possibly get per chapter. The Act 1 and 2 chapter count is only 3 instead of 5, and Act 3 is 4 chapters instead of 5. This game will go a little quicker but have quite a bit more nuance than simply playing 3 games of ARCS. Let's talk about all those nuances and changes to the rules now, including Blight, Empire, and events. Let's cover a couple of housekeeping items in the campaign before we jump into the rules about the Empire. In a campaign game of ARCS, we use this chapter marker instead of the normal chapter marker going up to 5. In Acts 1 and 2, the chapters only go up to 3, and in Acts 3, it only goes up to 4. We're also going to ignore these power level thresholds used in the base game. These don't mean anything in the campaign game of ARCS. Instead, at the end of Act 3, the person with the most amount of accumulated power over all 3 of the acts is the winner. Another thing to talk about are these objective markers along the power track. These move backwards along the power track instead of forwards. Your objective for each individual act is shown on your objective card that we looked at the beginning of setup. It showed where to put it along the track depending on the number of players, and it also shows how to actually advance your objective. So, for the Steward, we advance every time we win an ambition when we're the first regent. We'll complete our objective if we make it down to the 0 space on the power track with our objective marker. I'll also, of course, talk about what happens when you complete your objective later. Let's talk now about the rules around the Empire. So everybody starts off the game as an Imperial Regent. It's shown here exactly how that works. One player is also the first regent, who controls the Imperial Trust and the frozen resources. A player can leave the Empire during a summit, which we'll talk about in a bit, and become an outlaw. This also has a different set of rules. The Empire has an overarching power across the Reach. They control any systems that have any fresh Imperial ships, ignoring the normal control laws. So even though there's 3 red ships in this system, the Empire still controls it. The player who is the first regent controls all of the systems that the Empire is in for the purposes of ambitions, objectives, and events. We'll further explain this in a little bit. All Imperial regents also follow the presence, movement, and truce laws. The presence law is as follows. In systems with loyal pieces, like this one here, they control the system if it's an Empire-controlled system and can take actions using the Imperial ships there. They could move with them, repair them, battle with them, even tax cities that the Empire controls. The movement law states that for every Imperial ship that's moving, it has to be accompanied by a loyal ship. So, in order to move Imperial ships, you have to send at least that many loyal ships along with it. In order to move this purple ship, this red player would have to move this single red ship along as well. Catapult moves are also infected by the Imperium when they're in gates. If the Empire controls a gate, any pieces that are an outlaw cannot move through it and have to stop their catapult move in there. Regent control ends the catapult move of any lone outlaw or rival regent pieces, but if that regent is being accompanied by any Imperial ships, they can move right through. Outlaw control of gates, however, ends the move of any Imperial or regent pieces alike. Finally, they follow the truce law. This says that regents cannot harm Imperial ships except for when they take their hits as attacking ships in battle. They also cannot harm or tax rival regent cities in systems where there is an Imperial presence. Essentially, regents cannot hurt each other or the Empire if the Empire is watching. Outlaws, however, can either choose a regent, an outlaw, or the Empire as the defender. However, any ships removed from the outlaw are given to the first regent as trophies, since there is no Imperial game board. Let's jump over to talk about event cards. Event cards are action cards, just like any of the normal action cards with the numbers on the front. However, they cannot be played to lead. They also cannot be played face down, so that means no seizing the initiative and no copying with them. Event cards, when played as your card for the turn, allow you to exactly copy the lead card, so the player who played this event can do mobilization with 3 pips. You cannot, however, take any actions using your event card if any player had played an event card or secured the Imperial Council card earlier in the round. We'll get into that. At the end of the round that an event card was played, we're going to initiate the event. Firstly, the player with the initiative may call a summit, and then regardless of whether or not they call a summit, the number and event dice are rolled to see whether we're going to resolve a crisis or an edict. Let's talk about the summit first. The player who initiated the summit may call to order. This includes flipping the decided Imperial Council side to its in-session side. They also have the choice to leave the Empire and become an outlaw. If they were the first regents, then it is passed off to the person with the most power. If there were any resources in the Imperial Trust, they stay there when it's passed. However, if all players are now outlaws, you will discard all the resources, but then you'll lose 1 power for all the resources discarded, and then discard the first regent tile to the supply. Or finally, if they were an outlaw at the beginning of this summit, they may revive the Empire by moving back to the Imperial Regent side and claiming the first Regent tile. The final call to order action is returning favors. Favors are any agents that have ended up on your fate card. You can return them to them and then perform a negotiation action. Negotiations actions are as follows. You can either make them choose one of their loyal pieces and replace it with one of your corresponding pieces. This can only be a city or starport if there's no more loyal ships in the system. You could also force them to delegate authority, which is replacing one of their agents on a court card with one of your agents. You could also force them to promise favor, which is giving one of their agents to another player's fate card. Or you could force them to transfer assets. This includes captives, trophies, resources, or even favors from any of their fate cards. Or finally, you could forcefully invite them to the Empire, which flips their outlaw to the Imperial Regent side. On top of forcing people to negotiate with you by returning their favors, any players during this section of the summit may also perform negotiations however they'd like. so they can give other people resources, give them their agents on their guild cards, and all kinds of situations. But remember, any promises you make verbally are non-binding, so you better request one of their favors in order to give you something that they need right now. If nobody is making any negotiations and calling to order has finished, then go ahead and end the summit here. We'll move on now to the crisis or edict that you may roll from the event die. If this die face with the big hit icon is rolled, we'll resolve the crisis. A crisis has 3 parts: Blight crisis, Fate crisis, and Court crisis. The Blight crisis happens first, so each fresh Blight will deal 3 hits, and each damaged Blight will deal 1 hit everywhere on the board. They must damage and destroy all of the Empire ships first. If there are no Imperial ships, then instead every player will take the hits. Fresh ships are hit before damaged ships. The Fate crisis then occurs. Some Fates add cards with the crisis text that are held by all the players. We'll resolve all of these in turn order. Then finally the crisis will happen in the court. We'll look at all of the Vox cards in the court and compare them to the number and icon that we rolled on the event dice. Each of these crises will tell us if we need to reference these and how to do so. Let me take a moment to explain the Blight, since we're talking about it now, before we move on to edicts. First of all, they're tough, which is this shield icon here. That means whether they're damaged or still on their fresh side, it takes 2 hits to actually hit them. 1 hit does absolutely nothing. So the first 2 hits, they absorb and become damaged, and the second 2 hits, they actually are destroyed. Players take the Blight as a trophy when they destroy it. Blight also affects movement. No catapult moves can move past Blight. They have to stop in the system with it as if this was controlled by a rival. Finally, Blight is damaged by the normal damage icon, but not by the city damage icon. Also, Blight can never intercept, so ignore any of these when targeting Blight as the defender. Think of Blight kind of like a neutral pest, almost like a xenomorph type alien with not much thought to them. If this side of the event die is rolled instead of the crisis, we'll perform the edicts, using this booklet. Edicts are performed from left to right along the booklet. Many Fate cards will add more edicts. So firstly, with the Govern the Imperial Reach, they can either enforce this policy or change to a new policy card from the Govern the Imperial Reach selection that we've got here. We'll go from top to bottom, enforcing all of the card, and then we'll move on to the next edict card if there were any. Some edict cards require you to freeze resources into the Imperial Trust. These cannot be stolen normally in battle because they have no key cost. However, some cards can allow you to specifically steal these, and also securing the Imperial Council from the card in session can do that as well. Let's move on from the events known as crises and edicts and on to the Imperial Council. The Imperial Council card is that card that we added to the court row at the beginning of the game, and it always stays in the court row as long as it's in session. Players can influence and secure it like normal, and will place it underneath their action card. We'll tuck it under on the decided side to remind us to perform it at the end of the round. But when we actually do this before sending it back to the court, the player who claimed it may call a summit, and then, if they're the regent, they become the first regent. But instead, if you're an outlaw, you can steal from the first regent off of the Imperial Trust up to your number of empty resource slots. For every resource that you steal this way, the first regent will lose 1 power. And then you can resolve either a crisis or the edicts. When this card is placed back into the court, you cannot influence or secure it. You must flip it back over, like how we talked earlier. Let's talk quickly about what these free cities and starports are that we set up at the beginning of the game. They may also appear from different Fate cards and such throughout the game as well. If you control the system, you control all of the free cities and starports in that system, allowing you to repair them at will, as well as tax them, build from them, and even catapult from the starports. They can be chosen as the defender for any reason, and can be damaged and even taken as trophies. However, if you raid them, you gain 1 resource for the planet type it's on per key that you spend raiding it. We have just a couple small things to go over before we talk about the intermission between acts and the exciting flagships. Firstly, our protected guild cards. Some guild cards, especially from Fate decks, may have this protected icon on the top left instead of a key cost. These guild cards are protected and cannot be stolen in a raid by another player. However, they are still discarded if this player were to provoke outrage in this type of system. Some cards in Fate decks ask you to attach them to cards in the court. If these cards are secured, then also secure any attached cards. If instead the court card is removed for any reason, slide the attached card down to take its place in the court row. Finally, some Fates have specific tokens. They may be placed on the board in systems or different players' boards, or however they're described on the Fate. These tokens cannot be harmed or targeted in any way unless it specifically describes that they can be. At the end of round 3 for Act 1 and 2, we're going to enter Intermission. Let's talk about what happens during that now. We're first going to resolve our Fate resolution. Each player resolves the resolution card in their Fate set that corresponds to the current act. So this is the Steward's Act 1 resolution. Based on whether you completed your objective or failed your objective, you'll do things like gain different cards, discard cards, explain things to different players, or even add cards to the rules booklet or the court. Each player who then failed their objective loses power equal to where their objective marker was on the Fate track. We're then going to return the captives, trophies, and the frozen resources to the supply or to the players who own them. We'll then return all agents on the court to their players, and then return all of the cards in the court to the court deck, except for the Imperial Council and Session card. Then we'll take all of the court discard pile and scrap it, permanently removing it from the rest of the campaign. We'll then repair and destroy pieces. We're going to repair all of the damaged Blight to its fresh side, which at the end of Act 1 makes all the Blight way more powerful. And then we'll destroy any damaged ships or buildings on the board. We'll also destroy any damaged flagship upgrades or armor. We'll then destroy all buildings and systems controlled by any players that have Blight in the system but no ships. We then give the initiative marker to the player with the most power. Each player then loses half of their power, rounding down. So if I had 19, I'd go down to 10. And then finally, this is the really exciting part of resolution. If you completed your objective, you're going to draw one Fate card. In the intermission between Acts 1 and 2, you're going to draw a B Fate. In the intermission between Acts 2 and 3, you'll draw a C Fate. If instead you failed your objective, you're going to draw 2 of these Fates instead. Everybody now decides whether to stay with their Fate that they had if they completed their objective, or choose a new one. If you choose a new one, you'll take that Fate card, scrap everything that you had regarding your previous Fate, give all of your favors back to the players, and then set up the new Fate as described on that ARCS setup. Here is the super exciting part about B and C Fates. Many of the B Fates have something called a flagship. We're going to go over that now. Instead of having all of your cities and starports on the map, you're essentially going to have one giant moving city. Additionally, C Fates all have something called a grand ambition. This is explained on their objective card, and because they're so far behind and have failed their objective twice, or simply just chosen to pivot, they now have a last-ditch effort to immediately win the game, instead of having to win the game by having the most power at the end of Act 3. Let's talk now about the flagships, and then I'll give you my final bit of cleanup. B Fates with this symbol give you a flagship. You'll take the flagship board and slide it in underneath your current player board. When you build a flagship, you replace all of your cities and starports on the map with matching free cities and starports. Your flagship is a fresh, loyal ship that can never be removed. Instead, it takes damage in the form of upgrades and armor. It acts like a starport where you can only build one ship per turn there. It also cannot intercept by default without having a specific upgrade. Instead of building cities and starports on the map, you're going to build them in the form of upgrades and then armor on top of those. Whenever you build, you can choose either one to add, but you can only add armor if a fresh upgrade already exists in that slot. You also can only build if your flagship currently resides at the specific symbol shown here. So you would only be able to build this tractor beam if your flagship resided on a relic planet. And then on top of that, you'd only be able to build this armor if your flagship resided on a weapon planet. On top of this, destroying these cities does not provoke outrage, and you cannot ransack the court. You also do not use these starports to build or catapult from. They're used in a completely different way. Speaking of which, in battle, your flagship collects dice up to your number of fresh starports on your upgrades and armor. When you attack, your armor and upgrades are hit like ships. But when you defend, your upgrades and armor are hit like buildings. An enemy also always has to hit armor before they can start to hit the upgrades, and they're removed by hitting them twice, just like a normal action would. Each of the different upgrades are shown on this flagship aid that you're given when you also gain the flagship. It allows you to do things like build 2 ships per turn instead of 1, or even intercept. Let's finally look at what setup looks like for Acts 2 and 3. In Act 2, you'll flip the lower power marker to its higher side. In Act 3 setup, you'll then flip the other 2 as well. We'll refill the court deck the same way we did at the beginning of the game, and flip the Imperial Council decided into in session if it was on that side. We'll then place 1 damaged Blight in each gate that has no Blight and no ships. We'll then roll the event die and look at the cluster symbol. In each cluster, we'll place a damaged Blight at the planet with the rolled symbol if it has no Blight. But instead, if it does have Blight, place 1 damaged Blight at each planet in the cluster with no Blight. So essentially, we'll look at the symbol and place 1 if there's nothing, and fill it up if there already is one. This Blight spreads quickly. Each player will then set up using the setup side of the act that we're currently in on their objective card. So for Act 2, the founder will set up doing this, and then flip to the objective side. In Act 2, everybody will place their objective marker back on the power track, but in Act 3, only the people with C fates do this, because they're the only ones that have a final grand ambition. Then all players may rearrange their resources however they'd like. At the start of Act 2, we'll place the chapter marker back on Chapter 1, and at the start of Act 3, we'll flip it over before doing so. And of course, draw your 6 action cards to start the first round. Holy crap, that's a lot. At the end of Act 3, we'll see who has the most power, and in that case, that person wins. Unless a C fate completed their grand ambition, which instantly wins the game instead. Either way, I hope you enjoy taking your fate on a journey and going through a massive arc of this wild campaign. I really doubt that more than 1% of you made it to the end of this video, but if you're the 1% that did, why don't you check out the Cardboard Crash Course Patreon? That's the most direct way to support me and keep me doing this. If you have any rules questions, I'll be in the comments section below if I missed anything, answering all of them that I can. Thank you very much for spending your time with me. I've been Ethan. Have a great one.